Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This is just a short discussion video. What do you think the best era in comics was, in your own opinion? Now, I know I can't hear what you're saying or whatever. You could type it at the end of this video and we could chat about it, but that's the purpose of this video. I wanted to talk a little bit on what I think the best era was. Now, this conversation doesn't mean when it comes to finances. Like, oh, the best era was this time. You could have got all these books and saved them and sold them now for, a mint. I mean, sure, you could talk about that and say this was the best era, but I'm not really referring to financial. I'm referring to just probably a good time to be a fan. A good time to be a fan of comics. Now, I'll tell you an era, in my opinion, that probably wasn't a very good time to be a fan of comics, was probably in the mid-1990s. Okay, I'll talk about my favorite, but let me just give you the opposite first. Probably, if you were a reader in 95, 96, 98, 2000, it probably wasn't that good of a time to be a fan of comics, because I don't think the comics were very, from my understanding, my perspective, you may disagree and that's fine, but from my perspective, I don't think they were very inspiring back then, back in that time period. Now, I know I became a fan in the early 90s, and I enjoyed Spawn. People watch my channel, I like Spawn a lot. I think that was great, and there were other good things too. But if I recall, just going back to the X-Men stories from that time period, like 93, 94, 95, I wasn't, to me, they weren't really that good. They were okay. I remember when Colossus became a bad guy, and it just made no sense. It just really didn't make any sense to me. It's just like, okay, it's like, it was kind of depressing, and some of the payoff, at the end, when you get to the end of these story arcs and all of that, the payoff wasn't really there. And I felt that was present in X-Men. I also felt it was present in a lot of the Spider-Man. I talked in a previous video about the Spider clone, how the idea was to bring back the Spider clone who last appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 149 and do a storyline where another Spider-Man shows up, and it turns out that is the real Spider-Man who was thought to have been killed in the battle with the Spider clone. But the Spider clone was the one that we all as readers were following throughout the years. He just didn't think he was a clone. He thought he was the real Parker. He thought he was the real Spider-Man. And although I give the writer, I don't remember who came up with that storyline, I give the writer credit for trying something bold like that, and that's mighty bold, but I don't think it really worked out the way he may have thought. And it came off really bad. It came off, it just wasn't really a well-done story, in my opinion. And I think they later changed that idea around to where, originally it was believed that the real Peter Parker was killed and he came back, but it turned out that that guy was actually the Spider clone. It just was so convoluted. He became the Scarlet Spider. I'm like, another character that, was just not really needed. It was just a storyline that fell flat. Another thing, the mystery about Spider-Man's parents coming back. Remember, they were thought dead, and they came back, and they turned out to be what? Like, were they clones too, or robots or whatever? It was just a lot of bad storytelling. And those are just two small examples that I can give you when it comes to a time that it was probably not good to be a comic book fan. Were there other good things going on at that time? Sure, but I don't think there were a whole lot. So to get to the point, as I digressed, I think probably, if for me, The best time you would probably think in the early 50s with Tales from the Crypt and all that stuff. And I think that would probably be good because I would love to read those books and all that stuff. But I would honestly have to say that if I were to choose an era to be the what era was the best time to be a comic book fan, I would have to say the early 1960s. I would say with the beginning of the Marvel age. Sure, you could go back to 1938, 1939 and say, oh, it was the beginning of the comic book age with Superman and Batman and all that stuff, and Wonder Woman. Yeah, that's probably cool, but not really. Financially, it would be if you could go back and get all those books and then sell them later on, like I said at the top of the video. But I don't think that era was necessarily the best, in my opinion. I think it was being a kid, 8 or 9 years old, 10 years old, a little older, a little younger, whatever, and picking up that issue of Fantastic Four #1, picking up that issue of Tales of Suspense 39, picking up that issue of Avengers #1, and so forth. I think that was the best era because Marvel was putting out hit after hit after hit. Hit a few duds. X-Men, I don't care what anybody says. In the 1960s, the X-Men were a dud. I think some of their storylines were great. I think they had some great artists down the line with Neil Adams and others. But the fact of the matter is that series did not sell well at all, and that's why they went into reprints from 1970 to 1975. The X-Men did not become popular until the late 70s and in the 1980s. And I think their heyday was the 1980s. But so that was a dud. I think the Hulk was a dud. But I think they had a lot of hits. I think the Avengers were a hit. Spider-Man was a hit. Fantastic Four was a hit. They had a lot of good stuff. And if you were a fan in 1963, 1962, you came off the heels of the Fantastic Four. And then you get Ant-Man, which you may or may not like. But then you get Spider-Man. You get Thor. You get Iron Man. You get Nick Fury, which you may or may not like. You get the X-Men, you get the Avengers. It's just within a year, 2 years, you get hit after hit after hit. You like so much stuff to read. And that was really the creation, obviously, of the Marvel Universe. And you get to see it right before your very eyes. And I think that was probably the best era to be a comic book fan. Some may say, well, I think the Bronze Age was. And the Bronze Age was great, too. They had a lot of good stuff coming out. The storylines started to become more adult and all of those things, and the comic code, it weakened, and now you were able to have vampires and actually say vampires and zombies and werewolves and all those things that were taboo in the 1960s after really after 1955, after the comics code was created, and all throughout the 1960s. It wasn't until the 70s where it was eased up. So you might say, no, it was the 70s after being a 15-year-old or a 10-year-old, then starting to read all these horror magazines and these gritty storylines, having these gritty characters like the Punisher and Moon Knight, and seeing the Joker become the Joker again, and seeing Batman more gritty, and all those things. That could be a great era. I totally see that. And I can understand the Golden Age too, but for me, I think it would be that 1962 to 1965, 66 era, where Marvel was just putting out hit after hit after hit, and you just got this whole plethora of mythological characters. It was the Marvel mythology that was created right before the fans' eyes during those years, and of course beyond too, with late 60s and 70s and all that stuff. But for me, I think that was the greatest. Who wouldn't want to read Iron Man's origin story, pick it right off the rack, or walk down to the local magazine shop or whatever, the stand, and see Journey into Mystery 83 and Amazing Fantasy 15 being sold at the same time. Like, oh, what's this? Spider-Man, what's this? Thor, let's pick this up. I've been learning about Norse mythology in school. Now I get to see the character come to life in superhero form. It's just great. And they all turned out to be, most of which, except for the ones I mentioned, turned out to be hits. Hits with everybody. And It's why we're still talking about, that's why we're collecting comic books today. It's why we're talking about Marvel movies today. That's why we're talking about comic book movies in general today. It all sparked, the worldwide interest, I think. I mean, people were interested in comic books before that, with Superman and Wonder Woman, but I think when that Comics Code came out, it sort of threw a wet blanket on everything, and that lasted for a little while until Marvel jump-started, I think, people's interest by creating these new characters in a completely different company other than DC. So to me, I think that was probably the best era for all those reasons, and others that I'm not expressing right now. So, what about you? What do you think the best era to be a comic book fan was? Was it the 1960s? That period from 62 to 65 or 66 or 61 to 66, whatever you cut out of, with some of the points that I made or points that I didn't make? Was it the Golden Age? Was it the Atom Age? Was it the Bronze Age? Was it the Copper Age? Or is it the Modern Age? Let me know in the comments. Take care, everyone.